There's something unsettling about genius. It doesn't announce itself with fanfare or credentials. It hides in plain sight, camouflaged within behaviors so peculiar that most people dismiss them as eccentricities or flaws. We've been conditioned to recognize intelligence through conventional markers, academic achievements, eloquent speech, rapid problem-solving. But what if the truest signs of extraordinary intelligence are the habits that make others uncomfortable? The ones that seem almost wrong? Ibn Arabi, the 12th century Sufi mystic and philosopher, understood something profound about the nature of exceptional minds. He spent his life studying not just theology and philosophy, but the intricate patterns of human consciousness itself. Through his observations, he identified behaviors that separated the truly intelligent from those who merely performed intelligence. These weren't the habits celebrated in society. They were the strange, often misunderstood patterns that revealed a mind operating on frequencies most people couldn't perceive. Consider this. Every behavior you've been taught to suppress might actually be a sign of cognitive superiority. Every quirk you've tried to eliminate could be evidence of a brain working beyond ordinary parameters. The person who seems to waste time staring at nothing, the one who asks questions that sound absurd, the individual who retreats from social situations, these might not be avoiding life. They might be processing it at depths you haven't imagined. What follows isn't a celebration of intelligence as we typically understand it. This is an exploration of the shadow side of genius, the uncomfortable truth that exceptional minds often operate in ways that seem broken to average observers. Ibn Arabi's insights, combined with modern understanding of neuroscience and psychology, reveal patterns that challenge everything we think we know about what makes someone truly intelligent. The first habit is perhaps the most disturbing because it seems like the opposite of productivity. Highly intelligent people engage in prolonged periods of apparent idleness. Not the casual scrolling through social media kind of idleness, but a deep, almost meditative stillness that can last hours. They stare at walls. They sit in complete silence. They appear to be doing absolutely nothing, and this drives productivity-obsessed observers mad. But here's what's actually happening beneath that stillness. The brain of an exceptionally intelligent person doesn't stop when external stimulation ceases. Instead, it shifts into a different operational mode. Neuroscientists call this the default mode network, a brain state where internal mental simulation becomes more active than external perception. During these periods of apparent idleness, the intelligent mind is constructing complex mental models, running thousands of thought experiments, connecting disparate pieces of information that have been accumulated over weeks or months. Ibn Arabi described this state as the creative void, a necessary emptiness that precedes profound insight. He observed that those who constantly filled their time with activity never achieved the depth of understanding that came from sustained stillness. The intelligent mind needs space to reorganize itself, to let neural pathways strengthen and weaken according to new patterns of understanding. This isn't rest, it's intensive internal computation that looks like nothing from the outside. Modern research on creative problem-solving confirms what Ibn Arabi intuited centuries ago. Breakthrough insights rarely occur during active problem-solving. They emerge during periods when the conscious mind has released its grip on the problem, allowing deeper processing mechanisms to work. The intelligent person who seems to waste time doing nothing is actually allowing their brain to access processing power that focused attention blocks. But there's a darker element to this habit. People who engage in prolonged stillness often report feeling disconnected from conventional reality. They describe a sense of existing between worlds, not fully present in the immediate environment, because their consciousness is occupied with internal landscapes that feel more real than the external world. This can create profound alienation. The person who needs hours of apparent idleness to function optimally finds themselves increasingly incompatible with a society that values constant visible productivity. The second strange habit is even more socially problematic. Highly intelligent people frequently engage in seemingly meaningless rituals and repetitive behaviors. They might arrange objects in specific patterns. They might follow elaborate routines that serve no obvious practical purpose. They might insist on doing things in particular sequences that others find arbitrary or obsessive. To casual observers, this looks like anxiety, superstition, or mild obsessive-compulsive disorder. The reality is far more interesting. These rituals serve as external scaffolding for internal cognitive processes. The intelligent mind is constantly managing multiple complex thought streams simultaneously. Without external anchoring mechanisms, this cognitive juggling becomes overwhelming. The rituals create predictable patterns in the external environment that free up mental resources for managing internal complexity. Ibn Arabi wrote extensively about the relationship between physical ritual and mental clarity. He observed that the mystics and scholars who achieved the deepest insights were often those who maintained the most elaborate personal rituals. These weren't religious observances in the conventional sense. They were personalized cognitive management systems, unique to each individual's mental architecture. The specific ritual matters less than its function as a stabilizer for consciousness operating at high complexity. Think about it this way. When you're processing information at levels far beyond normal conversation, you need something to keep you anchored to consensus reality. The ritual becomes a bridge between the extraordinary internal world and the ordinary external one. It's not superstition, it's practical neurocognitive engineering. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. These rituals can become so elaborate and necessary that they begin to resemble pathology. The line between a cognitive management tool and a compulsion blurs. The intelligent person becomes dependent on their rituals, unable to function when these external structures are disrupted. Others perceive this dependency as weakness or rigidity, not recognizing it as the price of maintaining cognitive complexity that exceeds normal parameters. The third habit is perhaps the most alienating. Exceptional intelligence often manifests as an inability to engage with small talk and social pleasantries. Highly intelligent people don't just prefer to avoid superficial conversation, they seem cognitively incapable of it. They can't generate the casual, meaningless exchanges that oil social machinery. When forced into these situations, they either fall silent or say things that are inappropriate, too honest, or strangely literal. This isn't social anxiety or awkwardness in the conventional sense. It's a fundamental disconnect between how the intelligent mind processes communication and how average social interaction functions. Normal conversation serves primarily social bonding functions, with information exchange being secondary. The content of small talk matters less than the emotional resonance and social positioning it establishes. But the highly intelligent mind processes conversation primarily for information content, pattern recognition, and conceptual exploration. Ibn Arabi noted that the truly wise often appeared foolish in casual social contexts because they couldn't modulate their communication to match the superficial level expected. He observed that exceptional minds operated with a kind of relentless authenticity that made conventional social performance nearly impossible. They couldn't pretend to care about topics they found meaningless. They couldn't generate the appropriate emotional responses to social cues that served only bonding functions. Modern research on autism spectrum disorders has revealed that some of what we label as social deficit might actually be a different, more literal form of communication processing. Many highly intelligent people who struggle with small talk show patterns similar to high-functioning autism. They process communication for informational content rather than social context. They struggle with implicit social rules that seem arbitrary, and they experience social performance as exhausting cognitive labor. But the deeper truth is more disturbing. The inability to engage in small talk isn't just about processing differences. It reflects a fundamental disconnect between the concerns of the highly intelligent and those of average cognitive function. When your mind habitually operates with questions about consciousness, meaning, pattern, and complexity, conversation about weather, work gossip, or television shows isn't just boring. It's almost incomprehensible as a voluntary activity. The intelligent person genuinely cannot understand why anyone would choose to spend time on these exchanges. This creates a vicious cycle of social isolation. The intelligent person withdraws from social contexts where small talk dominates. Their social skills atrophy further through lack of practice. They become increasingly isolated, which makes them appear even more strange and disconnected when they do attempt social interaction. Eventually, they may abandon conventional social connection entirely, existing in a kind of self-imposed exile that others interpret as arrogance or misanthropy, but which feels from inside like simple incompatibility. The fourth strange habit is deeply uncomfortable because it violates our fundamental assumptions about knowledge and certainty. Exceptionally intelligent people demonstrate an almost pathological tendency toward doubt and uncertainty. They question everything, including and especially their own conclusions. They can hold multiple contradictory perspectives simultaneously without experiencing the need to resolve the contradiction. They resist definitive statements and become visibly uncomfortable when asked to commit to final answers. To most people, this looks like weakness or indecisiveness. We associate intelligence with certainty, with having answers, with confident knowledge. But genuine intelligence of the highest order understands something that average cognition misses. The more you understand about any complex system, the more you recognize the limitations of your understanding. True intelligence reveals the inadequacy of certainty. Ibn Arabi built his entire philosophical system around this principle. He argued that the divine nature of reality could only be approached through what he called knowing unknowing, a state of consciousness that simultaneously comprehends and recognizes the limits of comprehension. He observed that the wisest individuals were those who had abandoned certainty entirely, not because they lacked knowledge, but because their knowledge revealed the infinite complexity that exceeded any definitive understanding. This creates profound psychological tension. The intelligent person sees patterns that others miss, makes connections that illuminate hidden structures, but simultaneously recognizes that these insights are approximations, useful fictions rather than absolute truths. They live in a state of perpetual epistemic vertigo, where every answer generates more sophisticated questions and every solution reveals deeper problems. Modern cognitive science confirms this paradox. Studies of expert cognition show that true expertise correlates with increased awareness of what isn't known. Novices tend towards certainty because they don't understand enough to recognize complexity. Experts understand enough to see the gaps in their knowledge. The highest level of intelligence exists in this uncomfortable space of sophisticated uncertainty. But here's the devastating social consequence. People don't trust perpetual doubters. We want experts who speak with authority, leaders who project confidence, friends who offer clear advice. The intelligent person who habitually qualifies every statement, who insists on presenting multiple perspectives, who refuses to offer simple answers, this person is perceived as weak, unhelpful, or deliberately obstructive. Their intellectual honesty reads as social failure. Worse, this habit of perpetual questioning extends inward. Highly intelligent people doubt their own perceptions, memories, and judgments, to a degree that can become paralyzing. They second-guess every decision, recognize the validity of objections before anyone else raises them, and struggle to commit to courses of action because they see too many possible outcomes and unintended consequences. What looks like wisdom from a distance feels like torture from inside. The fifth habit is particularly revealing because it seems like a form of self-sabotage. Exceptionally intelligent people often deliberately seek out information and experiences that contradict their existing beliefs and preferences. They read authors they disagree with. They explore ideas they find uncomfortable. They place themselves in situations that challenge their worldview. This isn't masochism. It's something stranger and more fundamental to how genius-level intelligence operates. Normal cognition gravitates toward confirmation. We seek information that validates our existing beliefs, surround ourselves with similar perspectives, and experience contradictory information as threatening. This isn't stupidity. It's evolutionarily adaptive cognitive efficiency. Constant re-evaluation of core beliefs would be psychologically exhausting and practically inefficient for most people functioning in stable environments. But highly intelligent minds operate differently. They experience cognitive consonance, the comfortable alignment of new information with existing beliefs, as suspicious. When everything confirms what you already think, it suggests your thinking has become insular and possibly false. The intelligent mind craves contradiction because contradiction indicates contact with genuine external complexity rather than internal echo chamber. Ibn Arabi practiced what he called the embrace of opposition. He deliberately studied religious traditions that contradicted Islamic orthodoxy, engaged with philosophers whose conclusions opposed his own, and constructed thought experiments that challenged his deepest convictions. He argued that truth could only emerge from the tension between opposing perspectives, never from the comfortable agreement of similar views. This habit has profound psychological costs. Deliberately seeking contradiction means living in permanent cognitive discomfort. It means never experiencing the settled peace of confirmed belief. The intelligent person who practices this habit must constantly rebuild their understanding, accepting that every new integration of opposing perspectives will itself become inadequate and require future revision. It's an endless process of construction and destruction. Moreover, this behavior alienates others in specific ways. People interpret the deliberate embrace of contradiction as betrayal or instability. If you're conservative, your conservative friends will suspect you when you explore progressive ideas. If you're religious, your religious community will question your faith when you engage deeply with atheist arguments. The intelligent person who crosses ideological boundaries to understand opposing perspectives is viewed as unreliable by all sides. But the deeper issue is internal. Constant exposure to contradictory perspectives can erode the sense of stable identity. When you've genuinely understood the strongest arguments for positions you oppose, when you've felt the emotional and logical appeal of contradictory worldviews, your own position becomes less solid. You begin to experience your own beliefs as contingent choices rather than discovered truths. This radical epistemic relativism can feel like losing your ground, like standing on nothing. The sixth and perhaps most disturbing habit is this. Highly intelligent people demonstrate an unusual relationship with time that borders on the pathological. They experience time non-linearly, often seeming to lose hours or even days in what feels to them like minutes. They struggle with conventional time management, not because they lack discipline, but because their subjective experience of temporal flow operates differently than normal. This isn't mere absent-mindedness. It's a fundamental difference in how consciousness structures experience. For most people, time flows at a relatively consistent rate, with attention distributed fairly evenly across the passage of moments. But exceptional intelligence often correlates with what's called flow state, or deep absorption, periods where consciousness becomes so focused on internal processing that external temporal markers essentially disappear. Ibn Arabi described this as dwelling in eternity while moving through time. He observed that the most profound insights occurred when consciousness escaped normal temporal structure entirely, accessing a kind of timeless awareness where past, present, and future collapsed into simultaneous presence. He noted that those capable of this temporal flexibility often struggled to maintain normal daily functioning because they couldn't reliably coordinate their consciousness with conventional schedules. Modern neuroscience confirms that temporal perception is constructed by the brain and varies significantly between individuals. Highly intelligent people often show unusual patterns of temporal processing, particularly during complex problem solving. They may experience time dilation, where minutes of clock time correspond to what feels like hours of subjective experience. Conversely, they may lose entire afternoons to what subjectively feels like brief moments of concentration. This creates severe practical problems. The intelligent person who experiences time non-linearly cannot reliably predict how long tasks will take because their subjective experience varies wildly. They miss appointments not because they don't value them, but because their internal sense of temporal flow doesn't match external time. They struggle to complete projects on schedule because they can't accurately estimate their own cognitive engagement patterns. But the psychological impact goes deeper than practical inconvenience. Living with non-linear time perception creates a profound sense of disconnect from consensus reality. The world operates on shared temporal structures, schedules, deadlines, social timing. The person who experiences time differently finds themselves perpetually out of sync with everyone else. They're late for everything, but not because they're inconsiderate. They arrive early for appointments because they overcompensated, then spend hours waiting because their temporal intuition failed in the opposite direction. Even more disturbing is how this habit affects memory and planning. When your experience of time is non-linear, your ability to construct coherent narratives about your own life becomes compromised. Events don't arrange themselves in clear sequences. The past doesn't feel definitively past. It can suddenly feel more present than the present moment. The future doesn't feel future. It can collapse into now without warning. This temporal fluidity can create a kind of existential vertigo where you're never quite sure where you are in your own life story. There's something else Ibn Arabi understood that modern observers often miss. These habits don't exist in isolation. They form an integrated pattern, a syndrome of cognitive difference that defines exceptional intelligence. The person who engages in prolonged stillness is likely also the one who develops elaborate rituals, who struggles with small talk, who drowns in perpetual doubt, who seeks contradiction, and who experiences time non-linearly. These aren't separate quirks. They're different manifestations of a single underlying pattern, a consciousness operating beyond normal parameters. And this is where we must confront an uncomfortable truth. These habits don't just reveal above-average intelligence. They reveal the psychological cost of that intelligence. Every one of these behaviors is simultaneously a cognitive advantage and a source of suffering. The stillness that allows deep processing also creates alienating disconnection. The rituals that support cognitive complexity also breed dependency and inflexibility. The inability to engage in small talk reflects sophisticated processing but causes profound isolation. The perpetual doubt reveals epistemic sophistication but generates paralyzing uncertainty. The embrace of contradiction develops cognitive flexibility but erodes identity stability. The non-linear time experience enables deep absorption but destroys practical functioning. Ibn Arabi argued that intelligence of the highest order requires sacrifice, not the noble sacrifice of the martyr, but something stranger and more personal, the sacrifice of normal human experience. The exceptionally intelligent person cannot live a conventional life not because they choose otherwise, but because their cognitive architecture makes conventional experience impossible. They are exiles from normalcy, unable to return even if they wish to. This raises a question we prefer to avoid. Is exceptional intelligence desirable? We celebrate genius in the abstract, but the lived experience of these habits suggests something more complicated. The person exhibiting these patterns isn't living some enviable existence of superior understanding. They're struggling with fundamental incompatibilities between their consciousness and the world designed for average cognition. Consider the isolation inherent in these patterns. Each habit separates the intelligent person further from normal social connection. They can't engage in the casual interactions that create community. They can't offer the certainty that others seek in advice. They can't maintain the schedules that coordinate social life. They can't present themselves in ways that make others comfortable. The accumulation of these differences creates total alienation, and there's no easy resolution to this alienation. The intelligent person cannot simply choose to be normal. These habits aren't affectations or choices. They're manifestations of genuine neurological and cognitive differences. Asking someone exhibiting these patterns to just be more normal is like asking them to have a different brain entirely. It's not possible without fundamental damage to their cognitive capabilities. Yet the world demands conformity. Professional environments require time management, social pleasantries, definitive answers, and stable positions. Personal relationships require presence, certainty, and emotional availability structured in conventional ways. The person who demonstrates these 6 habits finds themselves perpetually failing by normal standards, even while their cognitive capabilities far exceed those standards. Ibn Arabi proposed that the path forward wasn't adaptation or conformity, but acceptance of fundamental difference. He argued that those exhibiting these patterns needed to abandon the project of normalcy entirely and instead construct lives that accommodated their unusual cognitive architecture. This might mean accepting poverty if unusual time perception makes conventional employment impossible. It might mean accepting loneliness if social incompatibility makes normal relationships untenable. It might mean accepting marginalization, rather than exhausting oneself trying to perform normalcy. This is a harsh teaching, but perhaps a necessary one. The suffering of exceptional intelligence often comes not from the habits themselves, but from the futile struggle to suppress or hide them. The person who spends years trying to force themselves into normal patterns depletes their energy without ever achieving genuine normalcy. They exist in a kind of purgatory, neither successfully normal nor authentically themselves. But here's the deepest mystery Ibn Arabi uncovered. These habits, as alienating and difficult as they are, also open doorways to forms of understanding impossible for normal cognition. The stillness allows insights that constant activity blocks. The rituals create stable platforms for consciousness to explore domains of extreme abstraction. The inability to engage in small talk pushes attention toward genuinely significant questions. The perpetual doubt prevents false certainty from blocking further discovery. The embrace of contradiction develops cognitive flexibility that can synthesize incompatible perspectives. The nonlinear time perception enables forms of creative synthesis impossible within normal temporal structure. The person exhibiting these 6 habits isn't just intelligent, they're processing reality in fundamentally different ways. They aren't better or worse than normal cognition. They're operating in a different domain entirely, and in that different domain, they can perceive patterns, generate insights, and construct understandings inaccessible to normal awareness. Ibn Arabi called this the intelligence of the heart, distinguishing it from the intelligence of calculation and analysis. The heart intelligence, he described, doesn't solve problems faster or remember more facts. It perceives the unity underlying apparent diversity, the patterns connecting seemingly unrelated phenomena, the meanings hidden within surface appearances. This is the intelligence revealed by these strange habits, not the intelligence of superiority, but the intelligence of depth. Yet even this realization doesn't resolve the fundamental tension. Depth perception doesn't ease surface functioning. Understanding cosmic patterns doesn't help you show up on time or make small talk at parties. The person who has developed Ibn Arabi's heart intelligence still struggles with every practical aspect of conventional existence. They may understand the nature of consciousness itself, while being unable to maintain a regular sleep schedule. This paradox, extraordinary depth combined with practical dysfunction, defines the actual experience of exceptional intelligence far more accurately than any celebration of genius. The real revelation isn't that these habits indicate above-average intelligence. It's that above-average intelligence at its highest expressions looks more like alienation and struggle than triumph and mastery. So when you observe someone engaging in these behaviors, the prolonged stillness, the seemingly meaningless rituals, the social awkwardness, the perpetual uncertainty, the embrace of contradiction, the temporal confusion, you're witnessing not just intelligence, but the lived cost of that intelligence. You're seeing someone who processes reality at depths that separate them from normal human experience, someone who pays for their cognitive gifts with practical dysfunction and social exile. Ibn Arabi believed that recognizing these patterns in oneself or others carried responsibility. Not the responsibility to fix or normalize, but the responsibility to acknowledge the reality of cognitive diversity and the genuine suffering it creates. He argued that those exhibiting these habits needed compassion rather than judgment, accommodation rather than correction, recognition rather than dismissal. But perhaps the most important insight is this. If you recognize these patterns in yourself, the revelation isn't that you're special or superior, it's that you're different in ways that will perpetually separate you from normal experience. And the question becomes not how to leverage this difference for success or recognition, but how to construct a life that doesn't demand constant war against your own cognitive architecture. There's no inspirational conclusion to draw here, no call to celebrate your unique gifts or transform your struggles into strengths. These habits reveal intelligence, yes, but they also reveal something more fundamental, the fundamental incompatibility between certain forms of consciousness and the world built for average cognition. Understanding this incompatibility doesn't resolve it. It simply allows you to stop fighting against it and start accommodating it, which might be the only form of peace available to minds that operate this way. Ibn Arabi spent his life exploring these territories of extreme consciousness. He never claimed the journey was pleasant or desirable. He simply insisted it was real, and that those who found themselves in these territories deserved recognition of their reality rather than demands to be other than they were. Centuries later, his observations remain uncomfortably accurate. Intelligence far above average isn't the gift we imagine. It's a form of exile, marked by strange habits that reveal not superiority, but profound and permanent difference.